around about the 10 o'clock period. Okay, right. So can I welcome you all to the June meeting, July. It's got the wrong date on the top of this day. What a good start that is, isn't it? This is actually the July meeting, not the June meeting, as if the more cleverer of you who will have noticed at the top of the agenda, it does say Thursday, 17th June. Yeah, well, it's actually the July meeting, so don't worry. Welcome to the Scrutiny Board Environment, Housing and Communities. And hopefully you find this morning's items something that you can enjoy. Now, just for the sake of any members of the public who are watching, this is a remote consultative meeting of the Environment, Housing and Communities Board. The public section of the meeting will be webcast via YouTube and accessible by following the links on the meeting page. A recent High Court ruling clarified that as of the 7th of May 2021, local authorities are now required to conduct physical meetings to take formal decisions. However, health and safety advice regarding COVID-19 means that under the current arrangement, physical meetings must be limited to 90 minutes and the capacity in rooms 6 and 7 and the council chamber have been reduced. Scrutiny chairs therefore jointly recommended that the first cycle of scrutiny boards in June would be conducted as remote, and we then agreed that the July meetings would follow the same pattern. You should, however, be aware that under this consultative arrangement, we will not legally be able to make formal decisions, and the consultative status means that some of the usual formalities will not take place at the start of the meeting. Should any decisions be taken that require formal ratification, such as recommendations to the Executive Board or those relating specifically to statutory functions, these will be referred for formal approval at the next physical public meeting of the board, which is probably going to be September now. So, for those that haven't met me before, I'm Councillor Barry Anderson and I chair this particular scrutiny board. What I'll do now is I'll go around and get the other members of the scrutiny board to introduce themselves. So, Councillor Akhtar.
Yeah, Javed Akhtar, London and Woodhouse chair.
Councillor Blackburn.
Councillor Anne Blackburn, family and Wortley Ward councillor.
Councillor Brooks.
Councillor Kayleigh Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Councillor Charlwood.
Councillor Rebecca Charwood, Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Councillor Collins.
Councillor Dawn Collins, Horsforth Ward.
Councillor Dobson.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Mark Dobson, Garforth, Swillington Ward, and Chair, I will be leaving at 11 for the COVID outbreak board.
Thanks, fine, thank you. Councillor Gabriel.
Good morning, all. Councillor Angela Gabriel, Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Councillor Graham.
Morning, everybody. Morning, Chair. Councillor Pauline Graham, Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
Councillor Howley.
Morning, Chris Howley, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Councillor Midgley. Yeah, I think you must be muted.
Oh,
there we are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I thought I muted myself. Good morning. I'm Councillor Morel Midgley, Kippax and Methley Ward.
Councillor Reagan.
Good morning, Councillor Denise Reagan, Bermondsey and Richmond Hill Ward.
And Councillor Ritchie.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Kevin Ritchie, Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
And last but by no means least, Councillor Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Trish Smith, Pudsey Ward.
Okay, right. So if we'll now go, just so that everybody's aware that if my connection goes down, Councillor Pauline Graham, provided her connection hasn't gone down, will take over chairing this particular meeting if my connection goes down. So if I can hand over to Natasha Prosser now to take us through the next few items.
Thanks, Chair. So under agenda item number 1, please can I ask members to declare any disclosable or any other interests? I'll take silence as none, thank you. And just to note that apologies have been received from Councillor Finnegan and Jane Maxwell today.
Thank you, thank you. Right, in respect of the notes, because we don't formally approve the minutes, that's done later on. In terms of the notes, they're there. Anybody would like to make any comments on anything within the notes? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a question I asked about housing benefit expenditure, which is on page 6 of the papers. The first main paragraph, bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And thanks to the officers, James, Roger's team, for providing the information. So in 2021, the average housing benefit claim in the private rented sector was 6,242, whereas in the council housing, traveller sites and temporary accommodation, it was much less at £3,746. So if you recall, the point I was making is making the case to government about the need to invest in council housing to lower the cost on the public purse. And they might also look into rent controls as well, which has been muted in the private sector. So it's much more cost effective, the housing benefit on social housing, than it is on the private rented sector. So thank you.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. Councillor Blackburn.
Yes, Chair. In the notes, it stated that there will be a briefing note to do with Mayor's new contract in West, and I haven't received it yet. If somebody could just remind them.
Yep.
And and I'd also just like to mention to do with the bin wheel outs and that there still seems to be problems in my ward over that, but I have mentioned it to the department. Thank you.
Yeah. So as far as the first item, James, as in James Rogers, presumably you'll pass that on to Gerard.
Yes, I'll pick that one up, Chair.
That's fine, thank you. Right. So the next item is the Safer Leeds update. Now, Councillor Cooper, is Councillor Cooper in the call yet?
She's just going to be a few minutes late, Chair.
Right,
We'll be expecting
right.
her about 15:15.
If the following people would just introduce themselves. Mr. Money.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's Paul Money, the Chief Officer for the Safer Stronger Communities team.
Okay, Mr. Hodgson.
Thanks, Chair. Simon Hodgson, Head of Service for Community Safety in the Safer Stronger Communities team. Thank you.
Liz Jarman. Is Liz in the call? I've not seen her come up. Okay. And Sharon Coates.
Hello, I'm Sharon Coates. I'm Service Improvement Manager at Safer Stronger Communities team.
Okay, right. So, Paul, are you going to lead off on this one?
I can do, Chair. I'll just do a very brief introduction and then invite the two colleagues who've just introduced themselves, actually, Simon and Sharon, just to talk through the detail. What we're going to be doing here, of course, is to provide an update about performance from within Safer Leeds, the community safety strategy, against the priorities that were set in our our existing strategy 2018 to 2021. But then I think Simon will then go on to detail some work that we've done in respect of the new strategy which is detailed in the papers 21 to 24, where we've been working very closely with partners within the Safer Leeds executive, and actually more broader than that, around the emerging community safety priorities for our new strategy moving forwards. And we'd like to share some of that thinking with the board in terms of where we've got to and what that new strategy is shaping up to look like. In addition to consultation with partners, we do benefit in Leeds from having a very effective intelligence and analytical team working alongside us. So that team have also been working really closely around developing the evidence base for the new priorities as we do move forwards. So if that's okay, Chair, in terms of an overview introduction, perhaps just invite my colleague Simon to work through the presentation that should be on screen, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Councillor. We're going to actually start with Sharon. Sharon's going to do an update, and in your pack there is a report in there in terms of an annual update in terms of activity and outcomes. So over to you, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thanks for that bit of an introduction there, Paul. So yeah, so this short presentation is just going to give you a bit of a flavour of the additionality of the activities and achievements above mainstream activity for the last 12 months. So if we can go on to the next slide, Becky. So during the last 12 months, antisocial behaviour has been a main concern for the public. And we've faced numerous challenges throughout the pandemic with various restrictions imposed by government, especially with the higher proportion of the population being at home. And throughout this time, the number of queries and inquiries received into the service has been significantly higher. And some of you will be aware that the antisocial behaviour team has undergone a full service review over the last 2 years. And part of that review, the recommendations were that a comprehensive service offer was developed. This has now been developed and implemented, which clearly explains that we conduct impartial investigations into reported cases of antisocial behaviour and noise nuisance, and how we'll try to resolve those at the earliest stage. As part of that review, there was a recommendation that we implemented a triage team. That triage system and team has now been fully implemented, and all incoming referrals are appropriately prioritised, and it's supported by a system of performance monitoring that reflects the fact that different responses are appropriate at different priority cases, and the identification and assessment of vulnerabilities are embedded in that process at that first point of contact with service users. This process has been really instrumental over the last 15 months in dealing with the high volume of referrals that have been coming into the service. Where cases have been not assessed as an antisocial behaviour case, but they've been identified as a need to support customers, these have been signposted to the appropriate service. And for more complex cases, and if it's been felt appropriate, these have been referred into an antisocial behaviour MARAC for consideration. So that new system has been really instrumental over the last 15 months in being able to offer a comprehensive service to the public. And as a direct result of the impact of COVID, the LASBAC team has developed an enhanced service which has been up and running since September 2020. That team consists of officers from the antisocial behaviour team and police staff working closely with the university to deliver patrols. So these patrols have a number of elements: the intelligence-led proactive patrols, prevent and deter, and enforcement. And the service has been very successful in terms of preventing escalation and ensuring compliance with advice and guidance to students. And this approach has been really welcomed by the universities, police and settled residents and students within the areas. So during the course of the pandemic, that enhanced service has been able to adapt to trends and demands, for example, flexing resources to attend students' halls of residence citywide due to the uptake of large block parties and COVID regulation breaches. So there's been a lot of work going on in that antisocial behaviour team there. And there's more detail with it within the report that's included within your packs. In terms of drugs and alcohol, it's recognised that drugs and alcohol is a common factor that cuts across several strands within the community safety strategy. Leeds is one of the best performing cities for drugs and alcohol treatment in England, and it's supporting the highest number of people to complete treatment in the country. And in 2021, over 1,600 Leeds residents had successful outcomes. The service quickly and effectively responded to the COVID-19 pandemic to ensure that that continuous service could continue to the service users, and they moved from office-based working to remote working with the service users. So that service really continued. We've got on the slide next the domestic violence. So I'm not intending to talk too much about the domestic violence because I know a colleague on this call will be picking up some of those main issues for later on in that meeting. But some of the points to note that I think are worth noting is the creation of the new Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board in response to the new statutory duties. And also there's been a review of that front door safeguarding hub MARAC, and that's been a result of the significant increases into referrals into that system for more effective operations. So that's currently just being implemented now. Becky, if we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of street support, this is an integrated multi-agency service which was established in September 2018 for the day-to-day function and delivery of services relating to people in need on the streets. The team connects with various statutory services and third sector organisations offering support with a common purpose of reducing rough sleeping and begging. When the government issued all local authorities with their Everyone In directive in March 2020 due to COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, the Leeds Street Support Partnership infrastructure moved at pace and offered all people on the street or those at risk safe temporary emergency accommodation. Hub spaces and night shelters, which were previously used, were closed and alternative places were found. Hotels were sourced and staff support organised as we shifted from a communal space to the requirement for individual rooms suitable for isolating and shielding during those restrictions. At each site, wraparound support to address the needs of individuals were put in place, and at the peak of the pandemic, 8 commercial hotels were used to house these service users. This has been reduced over time to 2 main ones, with one being female only, as a variety of move-on accommodation has been secured. So in terms of that move-on accommodation, which will be a legacy for the city, and the majority of it is being sourced through external funding. So to give you a bit of flavour for that, 10 one-bedroom properties have been purchased off the open market. We're currently preparing allocations for rough sleepers or people at risk to move into those. The Somewhere Safe to Stay hub, which is a female-only accommodation provision, has been remodelled, and a new premises in the city centre is on track for the end of August. And this will provide 6 single units with 2 emergency spaces if required. Also, the Kirkstall Lodge has been remodelled, and that will provide a large property of 9 one-bedroom flats owned by the Home Group in Kirkstall, and that's now full, with individuals being allocated a flat as part of the hotel exit planning. And then the next thing on the slide is around hate crime. So Leeds has recognised the need for a citywide response to hate in the form of working with all partners and stakeholders. And this is especially so following the publicity around the George Floyd death and the Black Lives Matters movement. A hate crime strategic board has been developed, and it's set clear strategic priorities, including the development of an operational hate crime group designed to deliver on those priorities. In addition to that, there's a hate crime MAREC that's been set up, and this process has been developed to address difficult cases where individual partners could not find a suitable solution. These meetings are an opportunity for the key partners to work together to find a solution to these difficult cases, and also hold partners accountable. So there's been quite significant work around that agenda. And then in terms of Leeds Watch, so this is the provision of public space CCTV monitoring and a security patrol within Leeds. So throughout the last 18 months, that Leeds Watch service has undergone a full service review, and the main objectives of that review were to look at the service to see if we could meet the ambitions of Safer Leeds, and for the service to be effective and efficient and dynamic to any changes that may occur, both in service demand and budget pressures. And in addition, the other outcome of that review that we were hoping to achieve is to build on and develop a positive working environment for the staff at Leeds Watch, and for them to be engaged in a safe and inclusive environment. So significant work has been undertaken to establish the trends in service demand, both within the Leeds Watch service and with the key partners. And we've done significant work to identify those links with key partners and services, and we've put development plans in place now on how we can build on those existing links to deliver better outcomes. So they're now in place, them development plans. The review recommended a full service delivery remodel, along with a service restructure. So significant work's been undertaken with colleagues at Leeds Watch to move this forward, and that new service delivery model will be in place from the 1st of September going forwards. So that's kind of like a little bit of a flavour. That's what's included in your report on the pack there. And I hope you can see that there's been quite significant work and achievements that have been going on there. But we're not complacent as a service, that there will be future challenges and future things for us to address. And at this point, this is where I'm going to hand over to Simon, because those future challenges and developments will be addressed in the draft strategy for the next 3 years. So
over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Sharon. I think that was really good in terms of giving a brief overview of some of the activities that's been going on. And it very much is a partnership focused, the work that's been going on. And staff, operational staff have gone the extra mile in the last 18 months, I have to say that. Moving forward, obviously the cycle of the last strategy is now ready to be reviewed. We've got a draft strategy which is in your pack. It's gone through the formal consultation through Safer Leeds exec members. It went there on the 5th of July and was signed off for approval for consultation, obviously, with this board, and then following that into the executive board for full sign off. So over the next couple of slides, I'm just going to give members a bit of an overview of the Safer, Stronger Communities City Plan, as what it's now going to be called moving forward. Just before I do that, I think it's just worth reminding members that the Community Safety Partnership, the Safer Leeds Exec, has a statutory requirement set in law to prepare and implement a crime and disorder reduction strategy. And moving forward, locally, that will be called the Safer, Stronger Communities City Plan. And that recognises the stronger element of how we work with and for our communities in localities moving forward. So in accordance with the constitution of the council, I'm here today just as part of that kind of due diligence, consultation with yourselves, an opportunity to shape the strategy moving forward. As we all know, strategies, we don't want them to sit on the shelf. We want them to be active. It's all right having these words. It's more around the delivery and the accountability and progress in terms of outcomes that we want to achieve. So that's important. I think the other context to note, members will know, obviously, the Police and Crime Commissioner came in November 2012. They published their first strategy in 2013 to 2018. That was updated in 2016 up to the end of 2021. Following the elections in May, a newly elected mayor of West Yorkshire was appointed. They take responsibility for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, but for us, they also assume the office and powers of the West Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. And currently, the mayor is undertaking consultation on their whole new strategy moving forward. So our strategy locally will fit in and dovetail within that work moving forward. Okay, so just moving forward now in terms of Safer Leeds, I think it's worth just going back to the fact that we have a really good partnership arrangement through the executive, chaired by Councillor Cooper and James as the lead officer. I think it's gone significantly over the last 20 years, can you believe it, since the Crime and Disorder Act. I think it's certainly progressed in the last couple of years in terms of that additionality that partnerships can bring. And the Safer Leeds has a real clear ambition, and our ambition is to make sure people in Leeds are safe and feel safe in their homes, in the streets, and their places they go. And the places they go includes those virtual places, which is more and more of an issue in society. That's our ambition. We have a number of strategic priorities. It takes on board the victim offender location kind of theory, but in essence, this is about how we keep people safe from harm, how we prevent and reduce offending, and as a consequence, how we create safer and stronger communities. And that's really important, how we work with our communities, with families and individuals, building that self-reliance and confidence. Thank you, Becky. So in terms of the issues and shared priorities, we've actually, through our intelligence team, we've done quite a significant amount of both qualitative and quantitative analysis to identify what our top shared priorities are. We've listened to our communities, we've consulted with stakeholders, and we've identified these key issues and shared priorities as the key ones that affect people's safety and feelings of safety at an individual level, but also at a neighbourhood and community level. And all of these negatively impact on people and places. Going back to what Sharon was saying, just in terms of the pandemic, it's actually shone a real light on a host of inequalities linked to these issues. And as a part of our commitment moving forward in this new strategy, we want to strengthen that commitment to address those inequalities. I think it's worth saying that crime and the impact of crime on individuals, families and communities, as all members will know, it can have devastating effects. And how we understand the fear of crime and how that affects people is really important to us in terms of moving forward. We do know that some communities experience crime and antisocial behaviour because of who they are, where they live. And for some people, they may not feel comfortable in coming forward and reporting that to statutory organisations. And that's not right. And that's something that we need to do and encourage people to report and feel that confidence in services. At the same time, as I mentioned, the nature and type of crime is changing, always changing and evolving. And cyber-related crime has, during the pandemic, become more prevalent. And there's a key area of work that we need to do around focusing on that, particularly around exploitation and grooming. I think it's also worth to say within that we've got a new model that's been developed, and this is about how do we turn our ambitions into reality? How do we make sure we focus on the key bits moving forward? And within that, we're looking for a bit of a shift in activity. We're very good as a city dealing with crisis. The pandemic has shown that. And from a community safety point of view, we're very good at responding and intervening. What we now need to get better at is shifting and intervening earlier to avoid those crises, identifying those individuals and families and communities who are potentially at risk of harm to reduce that demand and reduce the impact on them. So within the strategy, there is going to be a greater focus on this model. All the boards that we will have below the Safe Leeds execs will be required to consider this in their additionality. And we're hoping that shift over time will improve better outcomes for the people. I'm going to move on, Becky, if you could do the next slide. I think it's important to just let the members know the governance accountability arrangements, because obviously in terms of the scrutiny function, we can report in terms of your programme of where we are against any of those issues that I highlighted earlier. So from a new framework point of view, we've got Gold, which is our Safer Leeds executive. On page 10 of the actual strategy document, there is a bit of a governance framework which shows you all the boards, the silver boards that we have in operation. There's some new ones that are being developed as part of this evolving framework. They are jointly chaired by senior members from the executive who also have operational and decision-making responsibilities. And they are accountable to the Safer Leeds exec on a regular basis, providing highlight reports and raising any concerns or any risks or threats. Below that, we have a number of bronze groups, which is the actual delivery elements, again, a partnership delivery and task and finish groups. I think it's worth also mentioning the connected boards, which is really important. You know, crime and disorder isn't just a council responsibility, it cuts across the whole partnership, including our third sector colleagues, which are really vital in terms of the work that we do. So we work very closely with our key boards, including the Health and Wellbeing Board, the Adults, Children's boards as well. So they are key parts of this connected activity. Thank you, Becky. So just to summarise, I think we've got an opportunity now to, within this new strategy, within the framework that we've got, is to take things further forward and keep that focus on our strategic priorities in terms of delivery. And that's what it's really about. It's about people and place. So in essence, Chair, that is the strategy. I'll feed that back to you and to members and ask for comments and potential endorsement around the new plan. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, now there are three other people I want to introduce themselves at this time. First of all, Councillor Cooper.
Morning, Chair. Sorry I couldn't be with you at the start of the meeting as I had another meeting that I needed to attend first. So, morning everybody, my name is Councillor Deborah Cooper. I'm the Executive Board Member for Resources and Community Safety and Deputy Leader at Leeds City Council. Okay. You heard reference to someone called James. Well, that's James Rogers. James, do you want to introduce yourself?
Morning, everybody. James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Okay. And Claire Smith from the Antisocial Behaviour team.
Good morning, everybody. It's Claire Smith, Head of Service for Safer Neighbourhoods and Antisocial Behaviour from Safer Stronger Communities team.
Okay. Right. So over to questions. Now, what those of you who are getting used to my way of chairing things, what we'll do is we'll go through the various sections that we've got here. So if we go on to page 17, anybody get any comments they would like to make on page 17, which is number 1, street support? Yes, Councillor Collins.
Sorry, Chair, I don't have the notes in front of me at the moment. I do want to comment on Leeds Watch when we get to that, please.
That's fine. I'll bring you in. Okay, anything on then on page 18, which goes on to top right. I've got Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's actually on the first section, which started on page 17. I just wanted some clarification on the difference the new female emergency accommodation will be with the old style, because I've had very small samples, mainly when I used to work with asylum seekers, about sort of bad experiences that and the fear of going into sort of a hostile or refuge scenario. So just some reassurance that it's different and more like a home, hopefully, that the people will be moving into. And the second question I've got on that, around the assisted support for rough sleepers, I just wondered if that's extended to those who get a tenancy but still exhibit the behaviours associated with street homelessness, so they may still be begging. We've had figures on beggars that many actually have a tenancy, perhaps street drinking and what have you. And what I find when cases are raised, because I've had some in my ward, is that they refuse that additional support, maybe through housing. So we get into a scenario where those people, although housed, are still in that cycle of sort of community, causing the community some issues around antisocial behaviour. And the final on that question on that is some reassurance that that service does exist beyond the city centre, that additional support, so out in the wards. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's wanting to take that one?
I can come on that one, Chair.
Yeah, on you go, Simon.
Yeah, so part of my responsibility is the street support team, the partnership. Just to answer some of your questions, Councillor, in terms of the women, actually Leeds is only one of 2 cities that has a gender-informed response in terms of dedicated facility for women. We were the first in the country to have a safe hub for women who've been on the streets. And as you indicated, that's been moving over to a new facility in the city centre where they will have independent living. They won't be in a communal space. They won't be sharing. They'll have their own front door key, their own space, but there will be also on-site wraparound 24/7 support. And that is accommodation. It's classed as emergency accommodation, but it will be there for as long as we can find a place for women to go to longer term. So that's that first one. So I can reassure you that I think that is quite unique nationally. And we've got additional funding that's coming through the Ministry of Housing to support that in terms of the long term. I think the other one around the issues around people on the street who are begging and potentially do have accommodation, that is part of the team. The team don't just focus on the city centre, they do focus across the district. Obviously the concentration is in the city centre, but we do link in very closely with our MPTs at a neighbourhood level. And we do regular outreach in terms of engagement with people on the street. I think just in terms of context as well, if we look back to where we were this time in 2019, when we did our last accounts, then we were at around 60 people on the street. Last month in June, the count was down to 21. During the pandemic, we've actually moved on 200 individuals who were either at risk of coming onto the street in terms of being homeless, or who had been on the street in the past. And we've increased our blended accommodation offer across the city. That saying, there's still more to do on that agenda, and we know that. In terms of the link then, in terms of that reassurance, in terms of neighbourhood concerns, we're very much on that. Our intelligence picture is the best it's ever been. We know people who are on the street very quickly. We have packages in place. We now have 12 navigators who are employed through the third sector to work with people in their homes to sustain that accommodation so they don't return to the street. So I hope that gives you some reassurance, Councillor, that we're on this. Thank you.
Are you happy, Councillor Ritchie?
just to come back, that all sounds great, and you know, I don't underestimate the commitment that everybody's got to that agenda. But is there a plan B if the said person refuses support? You know, how do we deal with those, but continue perhaps creating antisocial behaviour in their block of, if they're in a flat, or even street antisocial behaviour? Because I've had cases where, you know, they've come back to me, either adult social care sometimes or housing, and said the person won't accept the additional support, and it seems then to come to a bit of a dead end.
Yeah, it is a challenge, councillor. It isn't easy. What we do is we always continue to encourage and work with those individuals. We do have powers within the team. We work very closely with the antisocial behaviour and police officers who are part of that team. When it is appropriate and where we can take formal action in terms of enforcement, whether that's civil or criminal, we will do, you know, and we will respond. Recently, last week, we had an individual who was causing problems in a neighbourhood in terms of antisocial behaviour in a block of flats. Engaged with him, we've had to close that property, place him somewhere else, and working with him on his behaviour. So we do that, and I can reassure you, we do that. It is always the last resort enforcement, but we will do it if it is required.
Okay. Right, I've got Councillor Pauline Graham and then Councillor Gabriel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the updates. Mine is about the rough sleepers and when they're put into hotel accommodation. At Christmas, we had a lot in a hotel in my ward, and they caused a lot of antisocial behaviour regarding drugs and carrying on with the same behaviour as if they were in the city centre. So my question is, because it's not easy for the departments and not easy for Paul and Claire and their departments as well to police, shall we say, the hotel should have a responsibility because of the people who live in the area and the residents and how they're being affected. And I've witnessed this myself because I did have one wave some drugs at me when I was riding slowly past to see what they were doing. So can we make sure, please, that the residents are taken into account, and when they're quite happy in a hotel on the near outskirts, they're still going into town and doing their sitting on the pavement and the begging. So can we be assured that the residents are taken into account, please? Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. I understand where you're coming from completely. It was a complete challenge for us. As you can imagine, we had a directive from the government saying, get everybody off the streets. We had to do that. We had to move that at pace. And we had 8 hotels at one point. And then we had a large concentration in one hotel in your ward, as you know. And that caused a number of issues in terms of some of the behaviours of the tenants, the residents in there. You know, which was unfortunate. We did put a wraparound support in there 24/7 and connected within our partners. We have moved at pace in the scale of things in terms of reducing the people in the hotel, in terms of rough sleepers and rough sleepers in the hotel and people who are homeless. They've all moved on from that hotel that was closed in April. We reduced the numbers significantly because of the implications and the impact it was having in the community, recognising that. So it is a challenge, Councillor. What we are doing and learning lessons from that, we will, wherever possible, we will not be using a concentration of that amount of numbers again in one space, in one hotel. I think that's fair to say. Thank you.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Graham? Yeah, you're happy.
Thank you, yes. And unfortunately now we have the hotel, we've got asylum seekers in, but touch wood, we haven't had any of the complaints that we received earlier in the year. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gabriel?
Yes, my question's on page 17 as well. It says that you've recently purchased private properties. Could I ask whereabouts in the city they are? Obviously not the actual streets, but rough locations, please.
Yeah, they are across the city, councillor, and I can share that information separately outside of the meeting, but they're not in one place only. They are across the city. We've looked at it's been really difficult actually in terms of finding the properties. The private sector market, particularly for 1-bedroom property, is really buoyant in Leeds. It's really hard to find them. We put in a bid for 20 properties during that period. We've been only able to purchase 10 at the moment, but we're ongoing trying to get more and ensuring we have consultation with local ward members as to where those are going to be placed. It has been a challenge. What we do know from our listening to the voice of people with lived experience is they prefer their own property. They don't want to be in a hostel. They don't want to be in a hotel. They don't want to be in any communal setting. They want their own front door and they want to be able to move on in their lives. And that has been a challenge, I have to say. So yeah, I can share those with you, councillor. Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Right, if we can move now on to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour. Now, we had antisocial behaviour at the last meeting, but sometimes when you leave a meeting, you say to yourself, oh, I wish I'd asked that question. So that's why it's important that we've got antisocial behaviour on the agenda. But anybody get any questions on the antisocial behaviour side of things? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So it's just about the communication and social media paragraph that was added in. I think it's on page 19, but it does come under this title. It says that the Lasbat Triage now have their own Twitter account and publicise successful enforcement along with advice or information. Why only Twitter? Very many people aren't on Twitter. And often, you're very limited with your audience. So I wondered if there was any thought about advertising that same information and advice on any other social media platform, or indeed on a website or in local notice boards and things like that. Because a lot of people, aren't on Facebook, Twitter, but they will look at a website, and then there are people who just have no online presence at all. So I think it needs to be a more rounded approach so that everybody gets the same advice, please.
Claire?
Yeah, I'll come in there, Councillor Smith. So as you obviously rightly pointed out, at the moment, the platform we have been using is Twitter as our main feed. It is something we are exploring at the moment with regards to other platforms, because as you state, that's not the only option available to us. So that is something we are looking at the moment. I totally appreciate, like you say, that not everybody has access to information, access to online data as well. So we're trying to also work with the local housing offices to see if we're in the community hubs around displaying any data around in those areas as well. So it is just something that we are exploring at the moment. And I can provide an update for you at the next meeting if that helps.
Yep. That's fine, thank you. Councillor Ritchie?
Thanks again, Chair. Yeah, first of all, a comment just on the triage system and sort of the members' dedicated email address. I do think that's an improvement on the service. So thanks for that. I recognise that the number of cases and inquiries you get means that although we'd like a quicker service, that's not always possible. But I do think it's a step forward. So thank you. My question is on the last bullet point on page 19 onto page 20, and it's about the Headingley and Hyde Park. Now, I do have an interest in this area now. My son's moved over there. So Dad's Taxi still exists. That service has been expanded. And I've seen, the state of the place, really, and it does concern me. So I'm interested in the PSPO, which includes leaving bags and bins on the street. So I wondered if we'd been able to use those powers. Perhaps there's lots of investigations going underway. I know there's the experience that my son and his friends moving into their property had about the waste that was left behind. So in theory, an identifiable tenant, and the letting agent just told them, "I'll leave it on the street," and the council collect it. Now, I don't think that's a sustainable approach for us as a city, because it does impact on other areas as well. So the question in short is, have we used the PSPO to try and tackle, from an enforcement perspective, the issues of particularly leaving big bins and bags on the streets? Thank you.
Claire?
Yeah, I can just come in there, Councillor, just to make you aware that it's actually the Cleaner Neighbourhoods team that would do the enforcement around the PSPO to do with litter. It is something new that has been added to the PSPO, and I am aware that they do have officers going around enforcing the PSPO that's in place at the moment. I wouldn't be able to make you aware of any figures around that, but again, it's some data information I can get for you going forward. It's not acceptable to leave it on the streets and expect the council just to come along and remove that. That's not the right advice. We do also link in with the landlords in the area, and we've attended quite a few landlords forums. So I'm really pleased you brought that to my attention, because that's something I can take forward to those meetings at the next one that's available to us. But rightly so, it's not right that the rubbish is left out on the streets. This is the reason that we added it onto the PSPO this time. So as far as I'm aware, it is being enforced, but again, I can get clarification from the Cleaner Neighbourhoods team for you.
Okay, and Becky will take a note of it and chase it up, and James has obviously heard as well the comments that you've made. Councillor Collins, you've got a question about quad bikes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've had a small increase in the problem with quad bikes in Horsforth, but it's probably only 1 or 2 people, but they're not being tackled, caught, nothing's being done about their activities, and it has caused quite a lot of damage to private as well as park property. So how do we catch these people with quad bikes that are abusing our green spaces? What resources do we actually have to do that? Do we have any? Do the police have any? Or is this just a low priority really on the triage? Thank you.
Claire?
Just to come in again there, it's actually quite high priority at the moment is the issue around quad bikes. It is an issue that we have across the city. There is police legislation that's in place to try and stop the behaviour, but obviously the concern is around identifying the bikes and being a professional witness to that. We did previously have an unknown persons injunction in place that unfortunately we've had to withdraw due to some High Court ruling, but we are looking again across the city to implement a PSPO for vehicle nuisance, and that should help us to be able to tackle it at a quicker rate. And if you've got any specific issues in a specific area, if you want to let me know separately, I can raise that with the local neighbourhood policing team in the tasking meeting.
Can I just come back, Chair? Because I'm just curious. So even if you get this restraint in place, how are you actually going to catch them though? Because they do move quite quick.
They do. Sorry,
Paul, you wanted to go in, Paul?
Sorry, Claire, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Apologies, Chair. I don't seem to have full accessibility in terms of the hand, but I just thought I'd just come in because I think Councillor Collins raises a key issue, and it's something we're looking to explore. The principal proactive resource to tackle this issue, which Claire rightly identifies as being it's a major issue actually. It's a nuisance and problematic in places like Horsforth. In other places across the city, it's probably worse than that. But the main proactive capability that we look to use is working closely with West Yorkshire Police with their off-road motorcycle capability. The issue with that at the minute is we'd like to increase and support West Yorkshire Police, increase some capacity into that team to recognise the significance of the issue that Councillor Collins has raised. And we're just exploring some options with our police colleagues, and we'll be liaising with community safety champions within each area, within each community committee, just to see whether there's the appetite to kind of work together on this and see whether we can build some additional capacity around an issue that it can and does blight communities, this kind of thing, whether it's quads or off-road motorcycles or damaging our green spaces and often causing issues in terms of presenting a bit of a fear of crime issue when you see vehicles being ridden dangerously without helmets and the like down main arterial road routes. That has a big impact on local communities, and we recognise that. So that's the principal way through which we tackle this. Our colleagues in Bradford run an operation called Steerside. The issue in Bradford is significantly more problematic for them than it actually is for us in Leeds. But we think there's some learning from what our colleagues in Bradford are doing around Operation Steerside that we'd look to introduce. And part of that is what Claire's touched on in terms of creating a legislative framework that makes this makes Leeds a hostile place for this type of activity insofar as we can. With some of the road traffic legislation, as Claire says, proving the offenders and identifying them is really difficult. But we're really focused on it, Councillor Collins. And as Claire has said, if you want further detailed briefing about Steerside and the approach that we're taking, happy to provide it.
Okay.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. Right, Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I've got a couple of points to raise on one on the PSPO for Headingley and Hyde Park, Little London and Woodhouse. As Councillor Ritchie has already alluded to, it doesn't seem to be having the desired impact. There's been problems with implementation, and from most accounts, it doesn't seem to be being enforced, especially around street parties and gatherings. There's been quite a few that have got out of control. I won't get into the waste side of things because that's already been covered and it's not really relevant to this board at the moment. So yeah, student changeover has been very trying, very stressful for residents, because obviously as old tenants move out, you get new tenants moving in. I'd like to know, first of all, has there been any progress on connecting together the university's contacts, because Leeds Beckett especially had a problem apparently with GDPR and sharing students' information with the council and vice versa. They were refusing last year to share that information with us. But also in terms of the student changeover, we've had issues with the students aren't actually technically students at the moment, so they're not signed up to any courses. So, like, has there been any progress on universities collecting where their students are going to be moving to try and tackle that sort of noise nuisance? The ASB Marek as well. So it says, if a case is identified as complex or persistent, it may be appropriate to refer the case for consideration to ASB Marek. Now, this isn't to do with the student issue. This is to do with there's been a string of abusive and I'd say like kind of medium level damage done to property and things like this in Blenheim View, which I actually flagged with the police yesterday, but it mentions youth offending here, and youth offending is involved in this string of cases, and I'd just like to know what the process is by which you would get those youth offenders. As well as that, there was a case of some young lads attacking a black constituent, and it was a hate crime, but the children were 12 years old. So how would that tie in with the youth offending? Because the police turned around to my colleague and said that there was nothing that they could do. So that's a lot for you to chew on there. I'd like answers to those, please.
Claire, over to you.
Hi, Councillor Brooks. So with regards to the students and the information sharing agreement, the universities are not necessarily able to share data with us around that about who's in each property, and they also don't have access to that information, as you rightly point out, until I think it's around September, October time. We are aware that a number of new students have kind of moved into those properties. We have an antisocial behaviour awareness week, which is next week, when we intend to kind of go out and do some work in the area with West Yorkshire Police around doing some door knocking. We've got a leafleting exercise just to make new residents aware of the implications of any antisocial behaviour, noise, nuisance that may be caused. There is some cases that of high priority at the moment that we've identified that we're kind of intervening at a very, very early stage. It is really difficult around the information sharing agreement. We do share the data that we get when we've taken action against an individual with the university, and we're able to do that under the Crime and Police Disorder Act. So we're able to share that data, and then they're able to kind of take any action. But it is difficult when they're not actually students, not classed as students until September or October time. But we are able to use enforcement powers if there is any identified antisocial behaviour or noise nuisance. You're aware of the enhanced team that we have that go out and do some work around prevent and deter. We are aware of quite a number of issues at the moment, so we are regularly meeting with our partners. We're meeting with Leeds Watch, with Communities team. We're meeting with West Yorkshire Police only this week. We've already had those meetings, and we're trying to be more proactive. We have weekly meetings with the police to look at if there's any, if we know if it's going to be warm weather or something like that. We're kind of trying to put a proactive service in place. So obviously try and combat any issues, and we're trying to get out early in the day as well. We're trying to get patrols out. So if you identify anywhere that if any parties have been identified as being started, like bunting and speakers, we're again getting in there early and intervening with legal legislation. Hope that helps around the student issue. The thing you mentioned about the MARAC, so obviously we would encourage any referrals through to the ASB MARAC. So this is basically when a case, if there's any issues with a situation or a particular case, if it's being raised at the tasking meeting and obviously it's not really progressing, there's some blockage there, a referral can be made through to the ASB MARAC, and a number of partners are able to pick that up. So at the ASB MARAC, we have like Children's Social Work Services, we have Youth Justice Service, we have youth offending teams there. So we have a number of agencies that are brought together to try and look at a partnership approach to try and tackle any issues if it's not been able to be progressed through the tasking. So if there's anything specific, like you mentioned about this particular street, if you want to refer that through to me separately, or I can have a chat with you afterwards, I can make you aware of the referral process and we can discuss that.
Okay, can I just point one thing out? You mentioned all of these people who are a part of the MARAC. One exception to that is the councillors aren't invited or allowed to go along. And if they were there, then Councillor Brooks, if she was at the meeting, she would then be able to understand the process and be able to impart the knowledge she's got. It's not the council's fault, this, I accept that, but I mean, it is a frustration that as councillors, we are not part of that process. And you mentioned a whole raft of other people who can speak to us, and it just seems a bit backside forward. Yeah. Anyway, I've had my rant for the day. But it's anyway, Councillor Brooks, do you want to come back again?
Yes, please, Chair. Yeah, I'm a bit unclear as to what the process is to get people referred to MARAC. Like, how would I, when constituents have been in touch with us, having been attacked with stones and having the M word scraped into their car, but it's a 12-year-old that's done it, and the police have turned around and said that there's nothing that they can do. The police haven't referred it on to MARAC, as far as I'm aware. So what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to refer it on and make sure that our constituents feel that they're being represented and being supported? Because what is in this document doesn't translate very well to what's happening on the ground.
I mean, you can make a referral within your own right to the ASB MARAC. And again, there is a process in place that we can kind of, I can kind of go through with you outside of the meeting. We can take action against a young person, obviously depending on their age. What age did you say they were? Sorry, Councillor Brooke.
They were like 12 or 13.
Right, so action can be taken against an individual of that age. It does depend on the evidence that we have, but that's not to stop us taking action, because actually if we intervene early, it stops that person's behaviour escalating. So there are tools and powers that are available to us. I'm not aware of the individual case that you're talking about there. It may be a case that we already have. It may be a case that the police refer through to us. I don't know the background to the case, but we can take action against a young person. We do try and work with a young person. We wouldn't want, the last thing we want to look at is formal enforcement action, but there is other tools and powers that are available to us.
Okay, Mr. Money has indicated that he would like to come in.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, and you've probably established that it wasn't a lack of functionality in the IT, it was a lack of IT skills about the hand up signal. But I just thought I'd come in on the back of Councillor Brooks's point there, and I'm wondering whether it may be helpful just to perhaps again through the community safety champions, just share a briefing note about some of the capability that we've got within case management generally, within things like the community trigger, which is actually being reviewed at the moment, but still an effective way of kind of reviewing how effective or otherwise an intervention might be in terms of a partnership setting, and what the ASB MARAC is designed to do, because that's focused very much around individuals with complex needs and some of the challenges that we have in terms of working with people with those kind of challenges within their lives. But I think within the range of tools that we've got, there is the capability for us to be able to more effectively reassure Councillor Brooks around at least some of the cases that she's referencing, at least indirectly in here, than maybe just relying on the MARAC process. But I just wonder if that would be helpful in terms of a wider sort of member brief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I come back, please, Chair?
Yes.
Yes, it would be helpful, please, Paul, but it still does beg the question, why a police officer has turned around to my constituent and said that there's nothing that they can do when they've had that kind of attack on their person and property, and yet there's all of this in the background that none of the members on here knew about. So if they were able to refer them onto the MARAC, why haven't they? That's it's great that it exists, but if it's not being implemented, then I don't see the point in it.
Got to come back, Paul?
Yeah, just to say that unfortunately I'm not aware of the specific set of circumstances here. And often my experience tells me, let's review the facts of the case, and I can provide Councillor Brooks with a more relevant update here. I'm at a loss, to be honest, here and now to explain even what that police advice constitutes. But if we could do that maybe outside of the meeting, that probably would be better, Chair, if that's okay.
That's fine. If I can, because I don't want to restrict debate, but I did bring it forward so that we could attend Councillor Lewis's briefing at 12 o'clock. So I'm trying to manage time so that we can all get in there. So if we can move on now to page 20. Anybody get anything on modern day slavery? Anything on the prevent agenda? Domestic violence, we'll leave that until the presentation on domestic violence. Drugs and alcohol, hate crime. Yes, Councillor Ritchie.
Yeah, sorry, I do appreciate the time constraints, but I just want to check on the disability hate crime. I know there's great work being done, Leap One, for example, doing some great work promoting, reporting, etc. But are there actually specialist officers to assist taking the inquiries and progressing them? Because obviously there can be issues around communication and what have you. some may not have an advocate to support them. So I do think that's a crucial element to progress things forward. Thank you.
Simon, do you know the answer, or Mr. Money?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, there are specially trained officers who work on this agenda. They tend to take a broader sort of remit across hate generally. So specifically about disability, I'll probably just have to do some further checks in terms of what our capability in Leeds looks like to fully answer the question there. But we do have specially dedicated staff working on the hate crime agenda, both from within the local authority and also working across with our colleagues in West Yorkshire Police.
And it's also worth saying, Chair, that we work, as you said, Councillor Ritchie, with our third sector partners on this, and we're looking to increase advocacy, across that sector, which is really key. You're absolutely right, and that's part of the new hate crime strategy delivery plan as well. Thank you.
Okay, right. So anything else? Anything else on hate crime? Tackling on-street sex work. Right, Leeds Watch. I know that Councillor Collins has a comment, also Councillor Ritchie as well. So Councillor Collins first, then Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, regarding Leeds Watch, we seem to have been waiting for an update for years now. I know when I first became a councillor, it was on the agenda then that there was going to be change, and they were going to tell us, somebody was going to tell us as to how this department was going to be improved, progress, etc. And we still seem to be on the cusp of having a report. So specifically, I'd like to know, where are we with regards to hardware updates at the moment? I know Horsforth was promised that the cameras would go digital and would be better resolution and give us clearer images, at least 3-4 years ago, if not more. The second is, where are we with regards to actually using that data? I know there's got to be some permissions, some contracts between the police and council officers if that data is going to be used in prosecutions. So where are we with reviewing how we use the data? And then finally, where is the funding for Leeds Watch going to come from? I know at the moment there are quite a lot of councillors across the city who subsidise Leeds Watch by giving part of their wellbeing funds to them. But we've all had our community committee funds slashed, and it's now a significant chunk if we keep giving these amounts of money to Leeds Watch. So what is the security behind Leeds Watch if they no longer get any wellbeing funds? So there's those three aspects to my question, please.
Mr. Money, are you going to cover that one?
Yeah, I can certainly start by way of introduction. It'd be probably helpful as well to bring my colleague in, Sharon, who's already spoken today, but has been kind of instrumental in terms of supporting the service through a significant review, which has just come to the point now where we're looking to implement the recommendations. I think in terms of and certainly an introductory response to the questions there, I think we recognise, Councillor Collins, I certainly do, that there is some really significant community safety work done from within Leeds Watch, and what we've probably not prioritised insofar as we maybe can is finding a way of communicating that work, particularly to members, and obviously the ability there that we've got in terms of that wider dissemination across communities, but countless examples on a day-to-day basis of really, really effective safeguarding. And it's been a frustration of ours, not just mine, about our ability to communicate that particularly well. And of course, it's a resource-intensive thing, and but it is important in terms of that challenge around reassuring people about what we're doing to keep people safe. In terms of the developments on that. They do form a fundamental part of the review and the recommendations that we'll be implementing. It has been a fairly significant review, so it has taken time, Councillor Collins, and recognise your frustration around that, but we've wanted to get this right. In terms of the other questions around the modernisation of the capability and indeed the funding, I think we all recognise where we are around funding, and certainly finding funding to build additional capacity onto our camera network and our monitoring capability is a challenge that we look to address in partnership, often liaising closely with members. I think in terms of some of the detail around where the reviews got to, Sharon, I don't know whether you want to add any further clarification around those points.
Yeah, I can come in on that, certainly. So in terms of the hardware, there has been some delays because originally, I think when discussions were first started around those upgrades or on cameras, we were looking at Leeds Watch implementing those upgrades as an individual service. But as discussions have gone on, we've had to work with colleagues within DIS around a full fibre network and linking with those, which has generated, a better working arrangement with those. Those colleagues are now, colleagues in DIS are actually working through how they will implement and upgrade those cameras that are currently in the locations out there. So we are working with DIS, and we're hoping within the next couple of months we'll get a timetable of when you will see those upgrades on those cameras in the locations. But it is a massive citywide project that they're doing, and the full fibre network just doesn't cover the CCTV cameras, it covers all the data infrastructure. So things have kind of like been put on hold, but there is that agreement that they will do it, and it will happen, and we're just waiting for that programme of when you will see those changes in terms of the hardware there. In terms of the data and using that data and getting that out to the relevant parties, that's been one of the issues that we did pick up on the review, that there's a massive bank of information that sits within Leeds Watch, and that those connections with key stakeholders and getting that information out into the wards for you to look at and use has been a bit of an issue, and there has been some GDPR issues associated with that. We have set up a development plan for the management at Leeds Watch to actually link in with community safety champions and start developing a programme of how we can get that data out, so there's that two-way communication. So obviously we've got the information that we want to share, but we also want to get information in. So there is a development plan, and you should be seeing things coming forward in the very near future. Like I said before, the new service delivery model, we're looking to have that up and running for the 1st of September, and the colleagues have been working on the other things just to get things up and running, but I know Liz Jarman has been making contact and setting those meetings up to move things forward in terms of that data sharing. In terms of the wider funding, I do acknowledge that there is funding that comes into Leeds Watch from those wellbeing grants. It has been an issue. It is on the agenda to take that forward and have those further discussions, but at the moment I haven't got a solution to that, but it is on that for that wider discussion. Yes.
Okay, I think I will need to move on. I know, Dawn, you maybe want to come back again, but
no problem. I'll get in touch with Sharon separately.
Yeah. Councillor Ritchie, you wanted to, when we were in the pre-meeting, you wanted to raise some issues on Leeds Watch as well.
Yeah, just quickly, the last paragraph refers to, and you've mentioned it there, Sharon, the redesign and restructure. I just wondered if, obviously not now, but more detail on that. It sounds like it's a work in progress in your last response, so I anticipate that may be coming anyway, but I think it'd be useful. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, right, anything else on the serious violence? Right, now, we then got the presentation of the new city plan, and we're asked to endorse it. Simon, when do you need the endorsement by? Because I would like to get, what I would propose to do is to get an in principle approval from the board, but give them the option of emailing through to either Becky or to yourself any comments that they may have, because you took the time to bring it to us, but because of time management, I'm just trying to think how to do it. So what date do you need this endorsement signed off by?
If you could, councillor, just in principle approve it, and then if any members have any specific comments or questions or suggestions, if they could email me direct within the next 4 weeks, if that's possible, sooner rather than later if we can, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
That's fine. So can I take it from the board that in principle you endorse the city plan that's before us today, subject to any individual comments you would like to make in private? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sorry I'm having to move it on. It's just with the deadline, I'm trying to manage things. Councillor Howley, you just put your thumb up just to say great. That's fine. So if I can now move on, thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll say publicly what I did say privately to Sharon in the briefing. I thought it was an excellent and well-written report, which had a lot of detail in it. And it also, and it's because of the level of detail, it does enable members to follow up on issues that it probably prompts in their own minds. So thank you to Sharon for the comprehensive report that she is there. Now, we can now move on to item 6. We've now got some additional guests who have been champing at the bit and probably thinking, God, he doesn't know how to chair a meeting, this guy. So can I ask Councillor Venner to introduce herself, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've actually found this very interesting. I've never been to your scrutiny board before, so thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Executive Board Member for Children and Adult Social Care, Early Years and Health Partnerships, and I've been invited to the item on domestic violence because a really unique feature of the Domestic Violence and Abuse Bill is that for the first time it recognises children as victims of domestic violence in their own right if they've witnessed it. So thank you for having me.
Okay, Councillor Arif, is she in the call? I've not seen her on the list. No, she's not. That's fine. Councillor Lamb, I've not seen on the list either, but we have Councillor sorry for mispronouncing my teeth in, Councillor Marshall Katang. Would you like to introduce yourself as well, please?
Good morning, Chair. Thank you, everyone, and good morning to you all. I'm Abigail Marshall Katang, representing Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Thank you. Nick Peasgood, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my name's Nick Peasgood. I'm the Chief Executive of Leeds Women's Aid, which is the largest women's charity in Leeds, also the contract lead for the Local Authority Commission Domestic Violence and Abuse Services across the city. I'm just here to answer any questions that might arise after the presentation.
Thank you. And Jude Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, morning, everyone. My name's Jude Roberts. I'm the Safeguarding and Domestic Abuse Manager within Safer Stronger Communities, and I'm going to be working through a presentation for everybody this morning.
We also have Councillor Cooper, who's already introduced herself, and also Mr. Money are also part of this discussion as well. So, Jude, are you leading and doing this presentation?
I am, Chair. That's correct. Yeah.
Over to you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Hopefully people have had sight of the paper that we distributed. The paper details a first part in relation to the Domestic Abuse Act and what that looks like for us as a local authority, but us as a broader partnership in terms of improving responses to domestic abuse. And then the second part of the presentation talks to our responses around the pandemic, and obviously the impact of what that's looked like in terms of domestic abuse for victim survivors, perpetrators and sort of families within Leeds. So Becky, can I just ask you to go on to the next slide, please? So like I said, First part of the presentation talks about the Domestic Abuse Act. It received royal assent on the 29th of April. Colleagues may know that took a fairly long time to get that to that point, but there are some key aims in relation to the Act. And first of which is about raising awareness and understanding about the devastating impact of domestic abuse on victims and their families. We're trying to improve the responses within the criminal justice system, protection for victims, and also bringing perpetrators to justice, but also strengthen the support for victims, survivors of abuse by statutory agencies. There's some really key elements to the Act, and there's a bit more detail in the paper, so hopefully there's a chance for some further questions at the end of the presentation. But as we've already highlighted, the change in status of children so that they are going to be recognised as victims, not simply as witnesses to the abuse. And obviously that has ramifications for all agencies working with families. There's a focus on duty to provide accommodation-based support. Interestingly, that at this stage, that's in relation to, it's not community support we're talking about. And there is some challenge back to government about how we maybe make our representation about how community support ought to be funded. When we look at our representation of victim survivors, the majority of those individuals are in the community. They're not necessarily in sort of supported accommodation. And then there's some of the elements of the Act that talks about changes to measures in courts, current legislation, and just some additional control measures and orders we can put on perpetrators in terms of sort of working with them around their behaviour. In terms of responsibilities on the local authority, it places a responsibility, a duty on us to provide accommodation-based support to victims of domestic abuse and their children in refuge and other safe accommodation. Obviously, we already do that, and you know, through our commission services around domestic abuse, but this is about giving that a legal footing. And then providing that the eligible homeless victims of domestic abuse have an automatic priority need. And again, we do that, but again, it puts that on a statutory footing. And then in terms of sort of secure tenancies, around secure lifetime tenancies. And you'll see in a moment how we've been working with our housing sector and housing providers to make sure we meet that duty. So what have we done so far in relation to the Act? One of the first steps was to establish a domestic abuse local partnership board that's chaired by Councillor Cooper. That board has already made lots of traction in relation to developing funding proposals for the next financial year. We are currently working on a needs assessment around our accommodation provision with an action plan, and that will subsequently lead to a domestic abuse strategy for the city. Really proud of a piece of work where running through everything we're doing is trying to ensure we've got victim survivor voice in everything we do to inform how we deliver services. And very kindly, Nick's on the call, and that just, I guess, is indicative of that co-production approach that we're adopting around making sure we improve responses. We have something that's called the DAVA, which is the Domestic Abuse Voice and Accountability Forum, and it's made up with over 40 third sector and commission services who provide some form of support for victims and survivors. And they are our critical friend, and obviously helping us ensure that we meet the needs of service users across Leeds. Very much aligned with other governance structures, that board, and you can see those sort of other strategic boards that we report to, and we'll be working alongside those boards and with Women's Lives Leeds around the strategy for ending violence against women and girls, and we link in with West Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner and the Combined Authority to look at how that looks, and obviously within that, looking at the national definition of domestic abuse, we include honour-based abuse and forced marriage within the conversations that we have. So as part of the duty, Leeds was allocated £1.8 million to meet that duty, and we're in the process of
committing this funding within the current year. It has to be used around safe accommodation, and we're working alongside partners and making sure, again, we've got the victim survivor voice about what that need looks like. And some of the examples of how we're allocating that funding are listed there for you, but just some standout stuff is enhancing our sanctuary scheme to support adults and children. So that's where we can obviously put target hardening in place at properties. Looking at how we can support housing services around provision for victims and survivors and children. And also looking at sort of smaller third sector organisation and their delivery as well, and particularly linking that in with people who may have protective characteristics and with BME populations as well. So that's where we are in terms of the Domestic Abuse Act. There's a lot of activities you can imagine around that, but I think one of the pressing things for us over the last certainly 15 months is how we've responded to the pandemic. And I think, you know, hopefully everybody is aware of what that's probably felt like for a survivor or victim, but there's never been a more dangerous time for a victim, I think, trapped in a house in lockdown with their abusive partner or family member. They're spending much more time in the household with them. That control can increase. They can't leave the house to make the phone call that they would normally do to an agency to try and receive help. Our ability as professionals to go in and see individuals and sort of recognise the signs and symptoms of domestic abuse have been really limited. Organisations have been very limited to telephone contact. And obviously, you know, whilst we're trying to curtail the spread of a coronavirus, that individual's ability to escape that has been a challenge. Very helpfully, the government did make an announcement throughout lockdown around, in terms of sort of lockdown, if you have to leave your household, then that is absolutely fine to do so if you are fleeing domestic abuse. One of the things that we've done is we've tried to collate a coordinated data sort of set around incident volume and what that looks like for services. And in your paper, there are a series of graphs which represents levels of volume for police call-outs, also stuff around children, and when children's services take a referral, where children are impacted around domestic abuse. There's some information around Leeds domestic violence, the commission service as well. But there's just some standout figures here that I wanted to share with you. Obviously, when we've done that data crunching, we have seen actually what is probably a lot of hidden harm. We've seen some peaks and troughs, and in particular, when the first lockdown was lifted in July, we saw a big increase in cases being reported for obvious reasons. And you know, in terms of where we sit individuals to ensure they are safe, and we saw some real peaks in terms of refuge spaces in January 2021. And again, we're seeing that replicated. Just in terms of some additional figure, sorry, Becky, just go back one, please. Thank you. In terms of our call-outs, of those, I think it's just over 22,000 police incidents. About 40% of those are repeat call-outs. Now, whilst that might be seen as fairly high, actually one of the, I think, the positives around repeat call-outs is victims and survivors are more confident in terms of reporting to the police and more confident about the service that they would receive. We have about 25% of cases where children are at home at the time of the incident, and of those 22,000, about 10% are what we would deem as high-risk cases. And high risk is determined by an assessment tool that the police complete at the time of the incident and when they speak to the victim survivor. Becky, thank you. I think it's safe to say that actually what we're reporting in terms of the numbers is probably only the tip of the iceberg, and they only show the cases that are reported to the police as a domestic violence incident. And we know that there's lots of reasons why individuals don't report. You know, we can apply that to female victims and also male victims as well. And certainly if we break that down around managed ethnic groups, with us, we are very aware that there is underreporting. And one of the things that the needs assessment that we're completing will obviously helpfully show us is where some of those gaps are and how we address those gaps. And obviously we're aware that that's underreported coming through our sort of police reporting systems. Next slide, Becky, please. So what do we do in terms of sort of responding to the pandemic in terms of practicalities? We established a tactical partnership group that's made up of statutory agencies and alongside our commission services as well. And just how we can respond to emerging trends and sort of any sort of blockages or peak or pinch points within the system as well. We've worked with Leeds Domestic Violence Service to secure some additional funding around some properties so we could expand the refuge capacity. The MARAC, which is our multi-agency domestic abuse meeting, happens on a daily basis and where we discuss the high-risk domestic violence cases. We had to very quickly move that onto an online platform, so that's all delivered through Microsoft Teams now, and we've managed to maintain our representation across the partnership at those meetings. But as you can appreciate, very high volume coming through there. We've worked closely with agencies who work directly with perpetrators and how we can maintain the management of those individuals and engagement around their behaviours, those ones that are deemed to be the highest risk. And we've tried to make sure that we've got that feedback in from communities around good practice and managed to put some literature out to communities in different languages. Appreciate that's only 6. But of the 6 most spoken languages in Leeds. We've done some briefings, I think, across for elected members as well. And we've done lots of work directly with our partnership agencies around delivery to make sure they've got the resources to deliver in remote ways. That is a very, very quick whistle-stop tour.
I do appreciate that you have shortened your presentation as a result
of
the pressures that we're under. So I've got Councillor Collins, then Councillor Reagan.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. The first is, you mentioned that you meet daily so that you can respond quickly to any new incidents or needs. What happens at the weekend? Do you meet, or does somebody else meet? So that was just a simple question. And the second is, you mentioned in the report that it's key to ensure that families and people who need new accommodation have that accommodation available. How are we doing in Leeds? Is the accommodation we need for these families who are under threat available? Do we have capacity? Is it quality accommodation? So those are my 2 questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Jude.
Yeah, Chair, if I can answer the first question, and then Nick, if you're okay, if I can bring in for the latter, if that's all right. The daily MARAC meeting, you're right, council meets Monday to Friday. It would require putting a provision in throughout the weekend. Obviously, the immediate safeguarding response for a victim survivor is met by West Yorkshire Police and whatever's available throughout the weekend. Obviously, Children's Services have availability throughout the weekend as well, so we can meet some of those needs. The cases that take place over the weekend are discussed on a Monday, so we roll over the weekend cases. So whilst it's not the next day, it is all delivered through a sort of a Monday to Friday process. Nick, did you want to comment on sort of accommodation provision for families, victims?
Yes, we have 25 units commissioned through the local authority in Leeds for emergency accommodation. Some of that is on-site refuge provision, but it is all self-contained. Some of it, there's 10 dispersed accommodation, which are houses in various localities. On top of that, we also have Leeds Women's Aid operates 18 other refuge units across the city. So in total, it's 43, 25 of which are commissioned. The issue about is there enough? No, there's not enough. It's across the board in terms of housing. There's not enough housing for anyone, and it's a nationwide issue. We are in Leeds trying to think proactively about how we can do things differently and in partnership. And Jude mentioned that we got some funding from the MHCLG last year for some additional refuge properties. Unfortunately, that was only short term, so that ended at the end of June. So yeah, we are looking at ways of increasing that, and with the new money coming into Leeds, we'll be able to make some of the existing safe accommodation, which isn't specifically domestic violence, but we can make some of that safer and call it safe accommodation. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I do feel like Leeds kind of leads the way quite a lot.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Regan and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Jude and your team, you've done some fantastic work in bringing this information to light, and I did attend the briefing to councillors. But at those briefings, we were alerted to that within my particular ward, Bermondsey, Richmond Hill, and my neighbouring ward of Gipton and Errolls, they had high concentrations of calls for domestic violence. And as a lead into this, and I know other colleagues on that are chairs of community committees have had that presentation delivered at community committees to give more information regarding. I would like to see, Jude, what the next stage is now, how we link local issues into a strategy for local domestic violence issues, where we can then feed that into the citywide, and I'd be happy to work on that with you.
Okay, Jude.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Thanks for your support and praise as well there. I mean, what we've got to do now is we've got to produce a needs assessment. It doesn't need to be published through MHCLG. However, that needs assessment will inform our strategy. Our intention is to deliver a strategy in a phased approach. The first bit is about just meeting our duty around the accommodation, safe accommodation element. But then beyond that, we need to have a wider strategy for the city that encompasses everything around domestic abuse, so perpetrators included, etc. And I'd be really keen to make sure we've got that local view and how that strategy then can transfer across how we deliver within localities, really. Because it's a bit like a hub and spoke model is the best way to describe it. Where we deliver on MANAC and high risk is doing the sort of like the risky bit, but actually the awareness raising, all the preventative work can take place within localities, and then that aftercare as well. So that's a really kind offer. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Smith and Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Great information there. I was just going to go back to the awareness section, if I may, and then I'll move on to another point. But I noticed before the pandemic, we were delivering 200 plus awareness sessions a month. Naturally, that's dropped, and I just wondered whether there was any scope or appetite to actually lift back up to that, because you currently say so far in 2021 there's been 706 sessions. So I appreciate that we're still in difficult times, but that's even lower than 2020. So I'd really like to see that. Prevention is always better than cure. So I'd like to see that lifted up if possible. And again, I'm sure we would help as well in our ward. So please do contact us if needed. The other point I was going to make is the new bill is obviously now giving children a voice. Children are now a designated victim. And we're introducing measures for controlling coercive behaviour. Now, that's absolutely brilliant, and I'd really like to see that put into action. I've got a couple of cases where that is absolutely spot on and would help immensely to solve these issues that I'm currently dealing with. I'd like to see it extended to the surrounding neighbours of these families that are the victim, because neighbours, particularly neighbours with children, are also falling victim to this, because they are also hearing it, they are also witnessing it. So I just wonder if there's any scope to stretch that a little bit and you know, be more rounded with who we can actually classify as a victim and offer help and support to, please. Thank you.
Okay, Jude. Oh, is he gone? Oh no, he's there. You don't look as though you have muted, but we can't hear you. But you don't look as though you've muted. There's something gone wrong with your sound. No, you're still silent. Because it's not coming up as muted, so it's not that. Right. Well, the only thing I can suggest is you've heard what's been said. If you could send an update through to the councillor so that to answer the questions. I mean, it is very difficult to do so. So if you can contact Councillor Smith, well, actually, if you can copy in Becky, she will then distribute the answer to that. So if we can now go on to Councillor Ritchie's point and then Councillor Blackburn.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just an earlier initiative. I think when the Breakthrough project started, the routine inquiry at GP surgeries, and I just wondered if we're still encouraging that. You know, I managed to. Well, I found that it wasn't going on in my surgery through my wife, and the team when I alerted the team at Leeds, they were great. Basically, the GPs had overlooked the email. It's something obviously they get under a lot of pressure. I think they need continually refreshing, and the offer that we've got to provide that training, if it's still seen as an important tool in getting the information, of course. Thank you.
Again, are you back yet, Jude, or are you still struggling? You're still struggling. Again, if you can answer the question later on. So,
Chair, I don't know if it's helpful, Chair. I might be able to just say. It's Nick, a little something about that.
Yes,
there was a report on routine inquiry and support within GP services presented at the last Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board that Councillor Cooper chairs, which was from the CCG, and I think it's been reviewed as very successful and is going to be rolled out across every GP surgery, and I think it was going to the Health and Wellbeing Board for approval. I might be wrong, sorry, I don't always know all of the boards. So I think it is something that hasn't gone away, but that's more likely to be getting more publicity and more promotion across GP surgeries. I can see Simon's nodding as well, he might know.
And Councillor Cooper as well. Yeah, that's fine, thank you. Councillor Blackburn?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask if we could have a breakdown of cases, obviously not named cases, but how many cases that there is currently in each ward, because I think that could be very useful to us.
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yes, okay. Anybody, any other comments they would like to make? So, yes, Jude, you're back in again, so you can hear us.
I am. I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, fire away.
Fantastic, great. In terms of a breakdown around wards, yes, we do that. So Simon's, we've got a data analyst sort of arm within our team that can provide the information broken down by wards in terms of police incidents. I missed the comment around routine inquiry, but I think maybe Nick responded to that.
Yes.
And
yes.
we've rolled out routine inquiry to all GP surgeries in Leeds. So if there's any GP surgeries that are not doing it, then we would like to know, please, if that's, and then we can have those conversations.
Okay, fine. Right. So I've got enough time. So if I can now ask, from Councillor Venner, from your perspective, is there anything you would like to add from the children's side of things, to clarify anything or to ask any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll make a couple of comments. So it's really fantastic that it's in this bill that children are recognised as victims in their own right, because the outcomes of witnessing domestic abuse are huge and span they're over the course of a lifetime. I mean, there's a really high percentage of people in the prison population, for example, who've witnessed domestic abuse. It's most children who come into our care as a local authority. Domestic abuse is a feature, often in some form of combination with mental health problems or substance use, but it's a really, really significant feature in children becoming looked after. One of the programmes that we have in children's is called Caring Dads, which is a fantastic programme. It's a perpetrator programme that works with men who've been abusive to their own partners and want to be better partners and better dads. And whenever I've heard those men testify at events, I've never heard anyone speak who didn't themselves grow up in a really brutalising environment. So that's another reason it's really, really important that we focus on the needs of children and recognise the impact that domestic abuse can have on them and their understanding of what's a healthy relationship and their future life. We have seen an increase in domestic abuse as a presenting issue at the front door for children's services, specifically over lockdown. So it's really important that this is a shared piece of work, that it's a shared piece of work between Safer Leeds and Children's Social Care and Adult Social Care, and between the Safer Leeds, the Safeguarding Adults and the Safeguarding Children's Partnership Boards, which is why Jasvinder Sangira, who's the Independent Safeguarding Chair for Children, co-chairs the board, which absolutely places the needs of children in that central place where they need to be. So yeah, that's just a couple of comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Abigail, do you want to come in from your scrutiny perspective? Have you seen anything that you think your scrutiny board might want to look into?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we actually went through ours with our scrutiny board in March earlier in the year, so it's not something I'll want to bring up here at this point in time. So thank you very much.
That's fine. That's fine. Right now, it's unusual for me to have to restrict, but Councillor Cooper, you've had all your papers, all three of the items that have come forward today. If you can restrict yourself to about 3 minutes, if you can, so that we can finish the meeting on time, but I'll leave the last words to yourself.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll be very brief actually. But just if I can start on the last paper the last presentation that you've just had from Jude around domestic violence, and I'm really proud that in Leeds that we're really taking the bull by the horns with this agenda, and indeed we set up the board, the Strategic Domestic Violence Local Partnership Board, before there was a statutory duty on us to do so, because it was so important to us that we got a partnership up and running and starting to look at the gaps and challenges around the city that we recognise are there and we need to address as a partnership going forward. So a thanks to Nick for all the work that she does through her work as well, and also the other people that are on that partnership board that are really working well together. We've met a number of times now, and things are really starting to gain traction. So thank you to everybody that's involved in that work. I really do appreciate the focus that you've put into it. If I can just say about the other papers joined together, really, that I think you've heard today that we're undertaking some groundbreaking work in terms of our prevention work and you know, our resilience work around community safety in the city. You know, when you think about the new accommodation that's coming online, the wraparound care and support that's offered to vulnerable people in our city, whether they be rough sleepers or sex workers or, you know, homeless people, we've gotten so much more improved intelligence around all of that work that we can really specifically tailor deliver that to individuals. So, you know, we're really making inroads to all of that, and that's the benefit that you're all seeing out on the streets with the improvement of that. In terms of other community safety, we know that we've undertaken a number of reviews that are now starting to have some traction as well in terms of the antisocial behaviour and how the new triage system's working, the new MARAC is working, and I want to reassure the board that the new antisocial behaviour MARAC is working really well, and it is really worth the while of the partnership coming around those issues. We know that everything's not perfect. We've still got work to do. We can still improve, and we can still get better at all of those things. You know, but what I want to finish by, Chair, if you'll allow me, is just to thank everybody who's worked on the community safety agenda throughout the last 18 months of the pandemic. You know, there were people on day one of lockdown in March who were out on our streets looking after those vulnerable people, ensuring that when there was an issue with domestic violence, that it was being addressed and people were actually looking to put support in where it was needed. You know, so I just want to take this opportunity to, you know, give a heartfelt thanks to everybody who's worked on community safety agenda and domestic violence over the last 18 months. Just a big thank you from me for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Now, if we can move on, thank you to everybody who has participated today. I apologise for the briefness, but I'm trying to bring us in on time. If we can go to the next item on co-opted members, are you all happy to note that particular report, the Scrutiny Board members? No. Yep, okay. And in terms of the work schedule, that's clearly set out. I'll be sending, or Becky will be sending an email to you about the suggestions about taking forward the community safety side of things, asking for your suggestions to where we could do some deep dives into the agenda we've heard about today, and also whether or not you would support inviting the new Mayor of West Yorkshire and or her deputy to come along to a working group meeting with us. So I'll be asking your opinions on that. So our next meeting is on the 23rd of September at 10:30 with a pre-meeting at 10. Hopefully we'll get information to you as to whether or not that's going to be in person or whether or not it's going to be remote. So with that said, thank you all for your attendance today, and hopefully it gives you enough time to switch off one button and switch on another one so that you can get to the next session. But thank you all very much, and I apologise for the hurried nature, but to try and bring it in, we've had to curtail things. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.